few centuries, Western civilization has the habit of suddenly going into metamorphosis. It enters into what we call deep transition. Within a few dozen years, the society transforms its conception of the world, its fundamental values, its social and political structures, its art, and its institutions. Within 50 years, a new world has arisen.
I believe that the world is going to take on a radically different form. It will not resemble any of the conventional forecasts. And whether you think of yourselves that way or not, you are essentially soldiers in a revolution that is changing the face of the earth, not just business and not just politics, but the global order or disorder itself. Much of the turbulence in today's world is the greatest onslaught of change, the greatest wave of change on the planet since the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution.
And what I would like to think of you as thinking of yourself as Columbus. You know, Columbus had a map. The problem is, on his map, on half his map, it said terra incognita. The other problem is you're going to need a little bit of luck, because we know Columbus was in fact phenomenally lucky, because Columbus should have died of thirst, because the problem was, how much water do you put on the boats to get you to where you're going? Columbus knew the world was round, but he got it wrong because he thought the world was only 1/4 as big as it actually is. And if the Americas hadn't been between him and Japan and the East Indies, Columbus and all his men would have died of thirst. So in addition to being smart, it helps to be a little bit lucky. And I think we're all going to need that. But the question is, you're building a sailing ship to sail into terra incognita. What kind of sails do you put on it? How much water do you put on it? What kind of food do you need in it? What's going to get you there when you don't have a map that tells you exactly what's going to happen?
So for the last 4 decades, we have been in a fundamentally different economy. We are already 4 decades into this economy. For the first 2 decades, people did not know that they didn't know that. For the last 2 decades, we know that we're in a fundamentally different economy. We're not sure what to call it, whether it's the service economy, the information economy, the third wave economy, the shopping and gathering economy.
No journey is more difficult to embark upon, more perilous to persist in, or less certain of success than spearheading the introduction of a new order of things. To be able to reorganize an enterprise, we have to start by reorganizing ourselves. Complaining about the complexity of the undertaking is no help. The world around us is characterized by confusion and turbulence. To face up to it, we need to put our minds in order. Otherwise, we will continue to feel obliged to react to events without having any power to control them. The first step in preparing for this struggle is to give a framework to this complexity, to organize the disorder. Change, turbulence, chaos. Words which most often provoke fear, but they shouldn't anymore. Our world, which we thought we knew, is evolving at a dizzying rate. The new rules of the game are adaptability and flexibility. The bottom line, The only thing that is certain is uncertainty itself. We have to be prepared to rethink our vision of the world and take a fresh look at our way of thinking. Every day, new phenomena shake our societies and our own organizations. This is more than evolution. It is a true revolution, which you can feel even in your own organization. To grasp the scope of this turbulence, which is unparalleled in recorded history, we will analyze what we consider to be the 4 mega-revolutionary principles which are reshaping the world we live in: social, technological, economic, and political. Taken together, their initial spells STEP, which remind us of the gap our organizations need to cross in order to catch up with the mutating world. These mega-revolutions have several common characteristics. They are rapid. Consider that 70% of the technologies which will be in use in 5 years from now have not yet been invented. They are profound and of unparalleled magnitude. In a matter of weeks, the Soviet Union floundered and then fell, activating a political epicenter which is still sending out shock waves. They are interrelated. It is difficult to imagine the demolition of the Berlin Wall in the absence of Western media which exposed young East Germans to images of freedom and, more importantly perhaps, the temptation of a consumer society. They are unpredictable. The crisis in Rwanda was not flashing on the political radar of any world power, let alone the United Nations. And they are also paradoxical. In an age of globalization, regionalism is gaining in popularity, and nationalism is increasingly hardline. The period of rapid upheaval which we are experiencing is profoundly altering our social fabric. Intermarriage, global cultural cross-fertilization, the graying of the population, the widening gap between the rich and the poor, all of these factors are transforming our society. But more than anything, growing access to information is a critical factor. Knowledge is the new fuel in what Alvin Toffler has called the societies of the third wave.
All of us have heard, excuse me, words like information revolution, knowledge worker, globalization. We hear them until our eyes glaze over. But the fact is that very few companies, and indeed very few countries, have any broad conception of the meaning of that for the future. And so what I'd like to do, again, is to sketch the broader picture. When I speak about knowledge, or a knowledge-based economy, I'm using the word knowledge in a very broad sense, not limited to computerized data streaming across our electronic nervous system, but rather knowledge in the broad cultural sense. It includes images, symbols, ideas, theories, values, religions. All of these things form the knowledge base of the society. And that base of knowledge now stands in a changed relationship to one of the dominant forms of human activity, the making of wealth, the creation of wealth. Every society has a system for creating wealth. In our society, knowledge has shifted its relationship to that system. What we are doing, in fact, can be summed up very briefly as moving from a brute force economy to a brain force economy. And that has far deeper implications than I think most economists are yet ready to recognize. Now, if we were just talking about internal changes inside a country or a society, that would already be transformatory. That would already be revolutionary in character. But in fact, you cannot do all of this. What we're talking about is not just introducing technology, and we're not just talking about business and economics, because the kind of changes we are talking about are also have a gigantic impact on culture, on personality, on religion, on values, on family structure, on the entire civilization, on even how we think, on our epistemology. If, in fact, knowledge is a central resource, it seems to me worth thinking strategically about. Right now, no company that I know of, I may be ignorant of some, and no country, and there I feel pretty sure, has a knowledge strategy, a broad, comprehensive, coherent idea about how knowledge fits into the system and what can be done. So in short, there is as yet no coherent, comprehensive strategy to harness, secure, protect, and enhance our single most precious competitive asset in the world, knowledge.
In the information age, technology enables organizations as well as individuals to free themselves from traditional constraints. Time and space no longer carry the old meaning. Ideas travel at the speed of light in a universe which seems to shrink every day. The virtual corporation, therefore, is no longer merely an idea. These new technologies offer an unlimited potential to organizations which understand how to harness them while forcing them to redefine their structure. On another level, the rapid digitalization of our world is changing the very way we live. Stan Davis, one of the great futurologists of our day, has perfected a grid to assist us to comprehend the architecture of information system.
In an agrarian economy, we were educated from ages, say, 7 to 14. In an industrial economy now, we think about education from kindergarten through college. But the pace of technology change is so great that we can only keep up with it if we go through life cycles with such speed. The half-life of an engineering degree is 3.5 years. By the time an engineering student graduates from college, half of what they learned is already obsolete. Knowledge is doubling every 7 years in general. The consequence of that is that we have to be educated throughout our life cycle. When you think of the infrastructure, think of it in terms of the forms and functions that information has. And they tend to have 4 forms and 4 functions. The forms that information comes in this society are basically in terms of numbers, words, sounds, and images. Now, we get information a lot of other ways. For example, in terms of intuition, imagination, emotion. What is the technology of emotion? What is the technology of imagination? We do not know yet, and therefore we cannot create enterprise around those until we have a technology. But we have a technology for numbers, words, sounds, and images. Similarly, the functions are to create the information, to somehow look at it, examine it, analyze it, process it, to store it, that is to say, find a way to keep it, and then a way to move it around, to send it and receive it or transmit it. Now, you'll notice that there is a box there that represents the processing of numbers. Data processing, that is where the entire computer industry began. And the other box, which is moving sound around, is where the entire telecommunications industry began. And because of digitalization, we have eliminated all of those, and we now are playing across the entire playing field. So anytime you begin to hear about the information infrastructure, that's it. That's the whole thing.
The rules of the game have changed in the economic arena. Competition, even in the most isolated markets, is more and more ferocious and often comes from outside. Frontiers no longer constitute an obstacle. Globalizations of market is an abstract concept until the day you start losing market share to a foreign competitor. No need to spell it out. The economic motors have also changed enormously during the past 30 years. As we said a moment ago, the fuel today is information, know-how. Brains, therefore, have become the only natural resource which count.
But what's happened is the strategic equation used to be have natural resources, have capital, have technology, have skills. 21st century strategic equation is very different. Because of the Green Revolution, the Material Science Revolution, and the addition of communism to capitalism, raw materials are absolutely irrelevant. They've fallen in price 40% in the last 20 years, and they'll fall in price a lot more than 40% in the next 20 years. And of course, that's why the Pacific Rim in Japan can get rich. You don't need raw materials to get rich anymore. Used to be, if you lived in North America or other wealthy places, you automatically work with more equipment. But with the world capital market, we all now effectively borrow in New York, London, and Tokyo. And I, an entrepreneur in Bangkok, can build a facility in Bangkok that is just as capital intensive as anything that can be built in Canada, despite the fact that you Canadians have a per capita GNP 18 times mine. You're not going to beat me by having more equipment. Now, if natural resources can be bought, if capital can be borrowed, and technology can be copied, what are you left with? you're left with skills. And so when you're answering the 4 questions, you answered it the right way. The problem is, on the skills, nobody's got it right. Singapore is trying to get it right, but nobody's got it right. If you say, who is the best educated in the world at the top? The answer is we North Americans. At age 18, everybody in North America is behind. Not one of us could pass the French baccalaureate. But then we go to college and we work harder, we spend more money, and then we put graduate schools on top of it that the rest of the world doesn't even have. And so there are 2 PhDs in biotechnology in the United States for every 1 found in all the rest of the world combined. The top 10 to 15% of us are the best educated in the world, ultimately. A little inefficiency in the system, but it ultimately gets us there. But how about that North American high school graduate who doesn't go to college? That person just isn't world class. At that level, world class means the Germans, where effectively half of the people who graduate from high school but don't go to university go into a 4-year apprenticeship program, about half of which is education and half of which is training, and in the middle, the Germans come out the best in the world. And if you look at the bottom 30 or 40% of the population, that's where the Japanese are the world's best. Take the stupidest high school graduate in Canada and compare them with the stupidest high school graduate in Japan, and you'll find that the stupidest high school graduate in Japan knows at least twice as much. Because at the bottom, the Japanese get the performance up to a level that is absolutely phenomenal from the point of view of both North America and Europe. One of the things that we in North America have to understand, which is going to be very important in the 21st century, it's always been one of the rights and privileges of the world's largest market to write the rules for world trade. Because if you guard the gates to the world's largest market and say, this is how you play my game, that very quickly becomes the world game. And that's why the British wrote the rules for world trade in the 19th century, and it's why the United States or North America wrote the rules for world trade in the 21st century. But by that standard, one of the reasons why you want to keep your eye on the common market is the rules for the world game are currently being written in the common market. Because they aren't just writing the rules for the common market. As they write the rules for the common market, it will be clear a decade from now those are world rules. If they limit media to 40%, the rest of the world will limit media to 40%. This is where the standards come from. And you can see it very clear if you look at manufacturing firms today in the world economy. What are they all trying to do? They're all trying to get themselves certified ISO 9000, which is a quality standard. That's a European quality standard. Every firm in North America now has to meet a European quality standard. 10 years ago, if we had anything like ISO 9000, it would have been an American quality standard, not a European quality standard. And what it's going to mean to those of us who live in North America is, for the first time in 50 years, we have to be outward looking. Figure out how they play the game and learn to play their game, as opposed to assuming that they will play our game.
It is clear that the mega revolutions which we have spoken of should engender political revolutions as well. The traditional power structures have been exploded by new organizational forms. Networks have spread across our frontierless world, thrown wide open by new communication technologies. The all-powerful state is face-to-face with the growing power of NGOs. Dictators with their dirty ends must answer to Amnesty International, and the entire planet is watching the action live on CNN, a prototype of the network organization of the future. It hardly needs to be pointed out that the political leaders have not had time to absorb the impact of this wave of changes.
There are fundamental changes taking place in the global structure of power, and power is not something unrelated to economics and to business. What I would like to do before we're finished this morning is to provide a rough sketch, an early map or cartography of the emerging global system of the 21st century. Let me begin by saying that if I look at the behavior of my government in Washington, and not just my government, but other governments as well, I see evidence of total strategic confusion and disorientation. I'll talk about Washington, as I say, but I could equally level the charge at most other governments. It seems to me that the policy of my government is being made more by television and by the tomorrow morning's headlines than it is by any kind of long-range strategic thinking. And the applause already? So soon? What you see is when the television cameras point toward starving children in Somalia, the troops go in. When that first American soldier is dragged through the streets of Mogadishu, the troops go out. And when the television camera turns somewhere else, the pressure begins somewhere else. And instead of having any grand strategy or any picture of the emerging global system, the governments of the world react in a knee-jerk fashion, and they're shaped by what they think is the main change of our time, and that is the end of the Cold War. So the question is, how do we introduce a new civilization onto the planet in the most peaceful fashion, minimizing the disruptions and instabilities that historically have gone with it? In order to do that, you had better understand who the players are. Who are the players on this planet? In the second wave world, or let me go back, in the first wave world, the dominant political players on the international, or what we would now call the global arena, were everything from city-states, empires, monarchies, petty principalities, all kinds of little political forms played a role in the global system prior to the rise of the modern nation state, which is associated with the second wave of historical change. When the second wave began to roll across the world, parts of the world, the nation states became the dominant players in the world scene. And nation states had basically closed boundaries, and they were like Newtonian billiard balls bouncing off against each other in the global system. And you could put together a balance of power with 3 countries over here and one to balance off 1 country over there, and then you could shift your alliances over here if this one got too powerful, and so forth and so on. That was the diplomatic game of the second wave. Nation states were the dominant forces. Today, if you look at the global system, you can see emerging in that global system something radically new. Think of it for a moment like as though it were a computer, which it is not. But imagine a computer. A computer has components. Who are the components of the new global system?
In light of the mega revolutions which we have identified, it is clear that organizations are faced with colossal challenges. They need to create new management forms and develop new alliances in order to ride the crest of the wave and not be wiped out by it. The challenge is tremendous, but can be nothing other than stimulating. For those who dare to take the leap, 3 attitudes will enable them to survive in a context of turbulence and rapid evolution. You'll need different strategies. You must learn to trade off strategic planning against strategic vision. Much more than a difference in semantics, it means being able to anticipate upheavals which could shake up the smooth running of your enterprise. The organization must also be able to create a work environment which is truly democratic. The days long gone of rigid structures which stifle all forms of creativity and spontaneity. The organization must give power back to the people who make it run in order to benefit from their full input. And finally, as a logical follow-on, it is necessary to develop your personal. The uncertainty which dominates the labor market has a serious impact on employees and their professional values. Organizations owe it to themselves to be aware of this and to increase the potential of their greatest resource, the people who work for them.
What are the initiatives that we've put in place to improve our competitiveness, to improve our productivity? And essentially, you'll see 2 or 3 different kind of initiatives, but I think they all boil down to a couple of very simple things. First of all, companies have been doing a lot of restructuring. And it goes by all different words, but we've been taking out the people, we've been delayering the organization, getting rid of tangential businesses, selling them off. The term we use is downsizing. Right? I think there's now a new term. We don't call it downsizing anymore. What is the term now? Right sizing. Did you ever ask yourself, why is the right size always smaller? Could never figure this out, right? Last year in the United States, 600,000 people lost their jobs in large American companies. 600,000. 128 of the Fortune 500 last year got rid of more than 5% of their people. and 60 got rid of more than 10% of their people in one single year. And if you go down the list of companies that have been doing this, companies like Amdahl, Kodak, Union Carbide, IBM, GM, Honeywell, very few of those companies make it on the list as an industry challenger. They are almost all laggards. We have taken enormous pain from this process. Communities have been destroyed, lives have been destroyed. I like to ask, what is the payoff? And how do you know when you're done restructuring? Right? What does it test? How do you know whether you're cutting fat or whether you're cutting muscle? Okay. Now, companies that have gotten beyond restructuring, so they clean up, they stop the hemorrhaging, then they've moved on to re-engineering, which is a current fashion. And re-engineering is not just about getting smaller, it's about getting better as well. There are some companies that have gotten smaller faster than they've gotten better, which is not a very nice situation to be in, but I think maybe GM, IBM have done a little bit there. Now, I can't argue with re-engineering. It has to be the right thing to do. Taking processes, simplifying them, focusing them on customer satisfaction, on quality, on timeliness, this has to be the right thing to do. Let me also argue, though, there is a dilemma here, just like there is a dilemma with restructuring. So I would argue all of this re-engineering is necessary, but far too much of it is trying to catch up rather than building new to the industry advantages. And whether you're a public or private enterprise, what you have to ask yourself is, do I have a point of view on where the next round of competitive advantage is going to come from? What is that new territory? I don't know what the answer is in your industry, but you have to find it. And I would like to talk about how do you find that answer. So, restructuring, necessary. Re-engineering, it is also necessary. Will these two things be enough? Is it enough to get smaller and better? If IBM reduces the development times on mainframe computers from 7 years to 2 years, will that fix their problems? If Sears had re-engineered its catalog sales operation instead of selling it, would that have helped Sears? And if you think about these three things, getting smaller, getting better, getting different may be the hardest. You can go both through restructuring and through re-engineering without ever challenging the conception of who you are as an organization. Why is it so difficult for companies to do this? It is difficult because to do it, you have to change your genetic coding. Now, genetic code is not easy to change. And re-engineering and restructuring won't do it. And I think the only way you can begin to challenge that set of assumptions about who we are and what we're doing is if senior management spends much, much more time thinking about where is the future going to be. You don't give up what you have unless you have a compelling view of where the future is. Are you architects of the future, or are you maintenance engineers simply running the present? What is a legacy you will leave in your organizations? And what is the intellectual and time commitment you need to create that legacy? Those are the things that I think represent the next round of issues for managers all over the world.
Does an ideal model exist? Isn't the organization described by Gary Hamel simply a beautiful fantasy? Well, the answer is no. A Brazilian corporation, Semco, has succeeded in making the switch to corporate democracy and reinventing the rules of the game in a difficult socioeconomic environment. Despite initial objections from many of its managers, Semco has remodeled its way of doing business and in the process has increased its profit by a factor of 10.
How come in the rest of our lives, in everything else that we do, we find that democracy is such a fundamental, such a vital value in everything we do, but how come I've never seen a democratic workplace? How come I've never seen a democratic office or a democratic factory? Why is democracy so important in the rest of our life, but why isn't it available in the workplace? Why can't people decide? Why can't people vote? And people say, well, they can't because they wouldn't know how, et cetera, which is what Pinochet thought in Chile or Idi Amin thought in Uganda, which was, I can't let them decide.
And that rationale was perfectly acceptable to them, is not acceptable to you, but in the workplace, democracy has no place. And what we were saying all along is that if you let democracy in, which is really the freedom for people to go in any direction they want, the solution they will arrive at, business solutions, quality problems, and profit, et cetera, are a consequence. Are a consequence, because these are responsible adults. They do not want to come to work as late as possible and leave as early as possible, and they don't care whether it makes a profit, whether it goes to hell, whether the product has any quality or not. And this is the assumption that we started from, and we found that these people do care, because these people are no different to us in any respect. So as we went along, we said, if this is going to be a democratic workplace, how come we're going to have to appoint the managers? How come it is us that is going to make the final decision about who is the right manager? How come the people that are going to work for this person are not involved? So we started a process where we said no one is hired or promoted to a leadership position without first being interviewed and approved by their future subordinates. And as we went through this, we found that the interviews that these people made were a hell of a lot more difficult than the ones we made. First of all, they know what they're talking about, right? They know how to test someone. We don't. If the guy dresses nice and he eats well and he holds his silverware correctly, he's already 30% of the way into the job. And for them, that's totally irrelevant. They're going to say, when you take the accounting number here and you divide by here, what is the result? And you have a very different answer. And you have a situation where instead of coming on a Monday morning and say, meet David Ardendale, you're new, and everybody says, David Ardendale, you have a situation where you have accomplices. You have a lot of people there who have a stake in making sure that this new boss works out, because they chose it. And we give them an opportunity with, I think, about 40 questions every 6 months to tell us whether they continue thinking the same thing, because there is nothing as situational as leadership. And so if it's situational, how come we're giving these people a 2, 3, 5, 10-year job? In maybe a year's time, they're already not the right person. But who's asking? So we said, we'll ask. We'll ask every 6 months. As this went on, we would say, well, if all that is true, then how come we can't give these people even more freedom? And we got to the question of salary. And when we got to salary, we got to that delicate point where we started thinking, what are the items? What is the criteria that determines what a correct salary is? And we came to 5. One of them was, what would people make somewhere else? It's a pretty good one. You find out, you ask Hay or you ask Price Waterhouse, and they'll tell you. 2, what do other people make inside the company? Cleaning woman to CEO, who do I compare with? And many times you're not comparing with a job, with a description, you're comparing with a person. You're comparing with someone that you know. Third of all, what can the company afford? Because you could be right on the first 2 items and still not be able to afford it. And then there's 2 that we know nothing about. One of them is, what did this employee want to buy and did not? What car was he looking at? What video cassette did he not buy? That's a fundamental issue for them. It's not an issue for us because we know nothing about it. And 5th, what are the ex-college mates, the neighbors, the wife's friends making? That's also a fundamental issue for people. And so there are all kinds of emotional and ego issues which are involved, which we know nothing about. So either we could try and extract this from people, which is very unlikely, or we could give them the other 3. When we give them the other 3, and they add it to the 2 they have, there is no more information needed to arrive at the right salary. And if the person arrives at the wrong number, whatever that is, we have a situation where we would rather know now that the person with all this information in hand is still choosing another number. It means that something is wrong. And we'd like to know about it as soon as possible. And so, as we went on with this process, we said, well, what is the check and balance of the system? It was that people can come to work anytime they want, dress anytime they want, set their salary anytime they want. But every 6 months, they have to get onto someone's budget. They have to get other people who agree. That is the only issue. And it is a very, very unforgiving issue. It's a very difficult one. Because the person determines the salary, determines a way of working, etc. 6 months later, the people in that department or in that business unit will put together a budget for the next 6 months. And they will write down the names of all the people they think should be there. And if your name is not there, you're out of a job.
Organizational change, we must not forget, is brought about by changes in the people involved within an organization. To bring it about, it is necessary to rethink the pact between employer and employee and take a fresh look at our ways of thinking and acting. To survive in this new economic environment, it is necessary to shift from thinking about employment security to thinking employability. This is the basis of the new pact. Insofar as the employee contributes added value and seeks new ways to add more, it is his or her right to ask for an interesting job, the resources to perform it properly, and of course training to continue developing new skills. Everyone in the organization can benefit from a mini evaluation exercise on a regular basis. Ask yourself, are your personal objectives clear? Can you anticipate how to add value to your own enterprise? Do you possess skills that are transferable somewhere else? Or does your network of professional contacts allow you to keep abreast of changes in your industry?
I think we don't understand learning very much because we went to school and learned to be proper, sit in long rows, and answer the questions the way it seemed as if we should. So when we started school with bright eyes and excitement, all of a sudden we finish at the university looking pretty dull. And the older we get and the more we are looking like the person who is director of everything, the more formal we get, and actually the less learning we let in. I just want to set some context this morning by suggesting the sort of questions behind this, that maybe, just maybe, we're not just about corporate change, or even organizational change, or even just governmental change. Maybe what's seeping through is some change that's really actually going to radically shift life. And if you're wondering what to do tomorrow, you shouldn't be surprised, because maybe nobody knows what to do tomorrow. So how do we know when we're thinking new? Or maybe more importantly, how can we abandon those ways of thinking we have without knowing what the next part is? How will we be those kind of people? I think most of our culture has encouraged us to become learned. And in fact, the more learned we got, the more likely we were to get the next position. And I recall the answers to the questions, that more likely you were going to be judged by what you knew, not by what you were learning. And therefore, we have to be advocates instead of inquirers. We have to look good instead of showing up not knowing. And I'm going to invite us that that's an inversion that might need to change if we're really going to advance our culture and perhaps even survive. So one of our jobs here together for the next days is to wonder what the loom is. You know, what would it take for us to begin to weave together some of the information left over from the information age? How can we make meaning or wisdom from it? And perhaps, just maybe, the loom is us talking together. Teams, 2, 4, 8, a whole corporation, a whole nation, beginning to work together in some new synchronized way. In our organizations, we have divisions. We have operations that are separate from one another. We have compartmentalized our life, so part of us goes to work and another part goes to church, and another part stays home and tries to tend to family. We have compartmentalized our thinking, so it's okay to talk about this, but not okay to talk about that. In school, we take separate subjects, and we're just expected to figure out how they all go together. And I'm thinking, every time today, when you notice sort of feeling a little stuck or wondering, ask yourself the question where that boundary came from. Where's that box from? Why did I think that way? Because if we don't find a way of expanding and making it more seamless, then how can we be together? And I know we live at the edge of a technology age, and because we're technology people, we sense that technology is going to answer our questions. You know, like, well, we'll be able to solve something that will get rid of our pollution, and we'll be able to solve something else that can get us to talk together again. And in the edge of all that machine going to figure it all out for us, we're left with a sense that maybe we've lost the soul of it all. And I'm very impressed if we were going to track as futurists what's going on. New York Times bestseller is Care of the Soul, a subject we shouldn't be able to be talking about, and we are. And I think the renaissance in business is to really ask the question, maybe it was our job after all, the development of humankind. Maybe human potential lands right in business because that's where it has to be, because that's where we work and live. How can we begin again to think past our machines? We've got big problems, but perhaps one of the ways that we can begin to look at the problem is to be different with it. Not try to figure it out or solve it, but begin to play with it and to begin to play with ourselves. We aren't anymore going to be able to just say, it's us, the ones at the top that have it, or even the senior managers, or even our mid-managers. It's the people who type our letters, and we have to ask the question, why do we have people typing our letters still? Have we compartmentalized in such a way that it's no longer productive to be human and work for us? We have to ask those questions because we're in charge of a whole group of people's personal development. Whether we signed up for that job or not, that's where we are.
The challenges demand the audacity to be sufficiently modest and flexible to adapt. The new world refuses to conform to a description in an instruction manual. In fact, the new instruction booklet must be rewritten daily. Only organizations and individuals that understand this will be able to navigate on the troubled waters of the storm which will continue to buffet us for many years to come. Before leaving you, we invite you to reflect on a series of attitudes that you could develop in order to build winning reflexes. Condition yourself to be incapable of tolerating the status quo. Even if you are the industry leader, it is essential to keep your team in a state of emergency. Nothing is certain, no glory is eternal. You must have a profound and unlimited curiosity. How much time do you spend watching the world outside your particular fire station? Have you considered what factors are likely to change the structure of your industry? Push your teams to acquire additional knowledge and to question themselves. It is also a good thing not to be shy to look at basic questions with the innocence of a child. Ricardo Semler, the head of SEMCO, says it is good to ask the why of things, to rethink what may appear to be evident. It took a little girl asking why she couldn't see her photograph immediately after it was taken to spark the invention of the Polaroid camera. It is essential to profoundly understand human needs. Theoretical perceptions are no longer sufficient. You have to get your hands dirty, take risks, get inside the skin of the people you want to reach. Finally, and above all, you must not be afraid to seek out contradictions. Only by exposing itself to contradictions without any punches pulled was the camera manufacturer Canon able to shake the monopoly of Xerox in the photocopier industry. As George Bernard Shaw puts it, you see things and say why, but I dream things that never were, and I say, why not?